Hi, friends. Jim Clark here, back with the Dismas Diaries. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. We're glad to have you. And if it's your return visit, I appreciate you being here and spreading the message of what we're trying to do with this podcast. If you would subscribe and like the podcast, that would be really helpful. I have an old friend named Damian, who I've known since college. I've given him a pretty good introduction in our conversation today, but I would like to just let you know that I have wanted to talk about other kinds of spirituality other than what Western theism and see what we have in common. The universality of our experience interests me, as does universality of feeling as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Damien, and afterwards I'll have a brief talk. He runs a little bit long, but that's okay. We can do this every now and then, a little more than a half an hour. So thanks for being here, and here we go with Damien. Hi, friends. Jim Clark here, back with the Dismas Diaries. If this is your first time joining us, welcome. We're glad to have you. And if it's your return visit, I appreciate you being here and spreading the message of what we're trying to do with this podcast. If you would subscribe and like the podcast, that would be really helpful. I have an old friend named Damian, who I've known since college. I've given him a pretty good introduction in our conversation today. But I would like to just let you know that I have wanted to talk about other kinds of spirituality other than what Western theism and see what we have in common. The universality of our experience interests me, as does universality of feeling as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Damien, and afterwards I'll have a brief talk. He runs a little bit long, but that's okay. We can do this every now and then, a little more than a half an hour. So thanks for being here, and here we go with Damien. Glad to have you. If it's not, I hope you are going to bear with me today. I got an old friend, very old friend, one of my oldest friends, not in terms of age so much as it is in terms of
That too.
length of length
Mm.
of friendship. He was my dorm my freshman year. He's on my floor, and we got to know each other pretty well. We ended up playing rugby together, and he was the one of the first persons in line when I went to a new parish for communion. And so we've kept in touch very nicely. His name is Damian, and he had an experience that I've never had. He spent a couple of years, I think, in Japan teaching, and he knows a bunch about Eastern spirituality and Japanese culture. And I'm just glad to have him here because I'd like to explore some of the things that are not within my mind, my worldview. So I give you Damien.
Hey, Jim, how are you?
I'm well.
I'm delighted to be here. Thanks for inviting me to participate in the Dismas Diaries. It's a wonderful project, and it's a treat to be able to chat with you about stuff that we both have an interest in. So I guess, to build off of the introduction, the kind and generous introduction you gave me, um, after I got out of college, right after I got out of college, um, I went to live in Japan, where I taught in an after-school school. My youngest student was about 3 and could barely speak Japanese and wasn't quite toilet trained. And my oldest was a guy who's a little younger than I am now, who was taking English conversation because he wanted to be able to speak to his son-in-law, a Danish sailor that his daughter had married. And that experience, adventure really, um, built on a long-term interest in Asia and in Japan in particular. I was trying to think about where that all started, and there were some books, and my dad had been an educator, and there were some exchanges with Japanese schools. But I was really interested in going to Japan, and pretty much unprepared. I have to say, as I look back, I
Have
knew it.
you taken any Japanese at Williams?
I did not. I had some Japanese history courses, or Asian history courses, but I had no Japanese language training at all. And
That's really tough.
yeah, I could understand what was on a Japanese menu, but I definitely had no language skills. And that, in line with the work you're doing with the Dismas Diaries, one of the things that I think has always been a kind of part of my life is that I participate in it, but often I participate at a distance on those personality tests where they ask, are you the kind of person that goes in the middle of the room and likes to be the life of the party, or you the person that stands on the edge and observes? I'm on the edge and observing a lot of the time. And I was prepared to be shaken up by my experience in Japan, but not really adequately. I had to land there and be shocked, really shocked by the heat and the temperature of the rainy season in early July. Shocked by my inability to understand, most everything that people were saying. I couldn't read, and I was expected to teach. And I was blessed really with some companions who were in the same boat. So, we leaned on each other. And that was one of the elements of the experience that I'm going to try to come back to, that notion that I couldn't continue as an outsider. I had to engage in some way in order to make the experience work. I had been warned, along with the other folks who accepted the position, not to take the job, but had decided to take the risk and go anyway. So there was quite a bit of uncertainty that I had, and my parents were nervous about it, and my buddy's parents were nervous about it too. But
One of the things the only few things that I know about Japan, or I've heard about Japan,
yeah,
is that it's an insular society. It really doesn't tolerate or want any outsiders. So that had to be brutal.
yeah, and although that there's two sides to that, and this was one of the insights that I had eventually, was that I was a gaijin, and that word in Japanese translates literally to outside person. And so the language, in a sense, defines people who are foreigners. And I'm visibly a gaijin because I'm Caucasian, not Asian. And I had some visitors, college buddies, one in particular who visited from Hong Kong, and we had some fun times where people expected him to be able to speak Japanese, and he couldn't, and I could. This was 3 or 4 years after I'd landed there. But there was a welcoming, and the welcoming, there was incredible generosity on the part of the people that I worked for. They recognized that there had been some problems the previous year. They worked really hard to make the transition for me easier and for my buddies easier. Um, and my students were welcoming. As I said, my youngest was basically a toddler, and they couldn't have been more excited to see and talk with a quote unquote real gaijin. And um, there were there was a curiosity. It was a time. This was in summer of 1976 in 1977, and Japan was economically on a roll, and it was a kind of exciting time for them, and they were very interested. The people I lived and worked with were very interested in the country, but the language and the culture. were always barriers. And some of them I could get over, and some of them I never really did. Um, so I guess the I'll share a couple of stories. One that sort of illustrates the fascination and the welcoming. Um, I began teaching, a week or two after I arrived. I was teaching in multiple locations. I was sitting on a train platform, summertime, dressed much like I am now. I have shorts and a short sleeve shirt on. I'd been outside a bit before. I came and, I was tanned and, I have some hair on my arms and it had all turned kind of golden. And I had more hair on my head too. And I'm waiting on the train platform for a local train, and the local train pulls in, and one of the cars was filled with little Japanese kids in their uniforms, as part of, I don't know, a summer school or, a year-long school thing. And in a moment, I was surrounded. And I was reading, and I looked up and I kind of smiled and laughed because I had a sense of what might be coming, and I greeted the kids in what little Japanese I had, which was like to say hello and were they well. And they oohed and ahed and sat down and, tried to speak with me, and I couldn't really speak. And it was just a lot of laughter. And this one little kid, sat next to me, and he reached out and he touched the hair on my arm and he said, kin, which is the Japanese word for gold. And, he was amazed by, the fact that, I had a body hair and that it was golden, not black and dark the way pretty much every Japanese person's is. And so that made me feel welcome, and helped me understand that, I could be, part of this community, and I could, you know, I don't know if I thought I could thrive yet, but I knew I could survive in the community. And, the students were generous. There were one or two situations where, um, I think it was a class of junior high or high school kids, mostly girls, and I was impatient with something they weren't doing, and my expression indicated that. And in one of the first times somebody said something unkind, I overheard her making a crack about the gaijin teacher and, not needing to really listen to whatever it was that I was saying. And I understood little bits and pieces of that, but enough to know that, she was angry with me, and I, that it hurt. And so, it wasn't like every single person was accepting, but for the most part, people were. And I mentioned the couple that I worked for. They were very um, committed to my success and my buddy's success, and to the success of the program that we were a part of. And they got us involved in a lot of extracurricular stuff. That was their time. On weekends, they began to take us to temples, to partly because they're beautiful and they're out. Many of them are out in the country, and we'd go and we'd have a lunch or a dinner and kind of walk around the grounds of these temples. And I was stunned by the natural beauty, the blending of Buddhism and Shinto, which have figured out a way to coexist in Japan in these settings. And I noticed that a number of people who were visiting some of these temples were carrying these scrolls or these little booklets that they had the folks at the temple write on. And over the course of the 3 or 4 years that I was there, I visited a lot of temples. I was interested in the art and the history and the religion, and I was kind of fascinated by the acceptance of the conflicts between the different religions, and I wanted to bring something home um, that would be a memory of my time in Japan. When I finally decided it was time for me to return, which is about 4 years later, I'd been working as a teacher the first year, as a mentor to other teachers for 3 years, and I had another job working for the same couple in another business that was an import business, and I was their U.S. representative, or I was their representative to the U.S. companies that they did business with. And so I was a kind of bridge between them. And I said to them when I decided to leave that I wanted to go on a pilgrimage. And it wasn't like a formal thing where I dressed up in a white cloak and carried a staff and wore a straw hat. I, there was a book that I had that was a guidebook that showed train and bus routes, and they these people, the Uchiboris, were impressed by that um, decision and that desire, and they did what they could to help me out. And we got started. We
Damian, Damian, can you share with us what the point of the pilgrimage was? I mean,
Yeah, I
what's the
can. In
purpose?
fact, I don't know if this will work, but give me 1 second. I have a image. Actually, I can't share it, but I can send a request. The There are many um, pilgrimages in Japan. And the one that I decided to embark on was the oldest, or is the oldest. And it involves a group of temples in central Japan that kind of crosses, not quite exactly north to south, the spine of the main island.
You can share that image if you want.
Okay, so hang on a second. So this image here, the scroll itself, you can see, here, the figure in the center is the incarnation of the Buddha's compassion and mercy.
Okay.
In Sanskrit, the deity's name is Avalokitesvara, I believe. In Chinese, it's Guanyin or Kuan Yin, and in Japan, it's Kannon. And there are many other variations on the name, wherever Buddhism is. And the idea of doing the pilgrimage was that it was something that Japanese people did, that it was a way for me to grow and cultivate a part of myself that um, wasn't always present and still isn't. I've been accused more than once of being, a little harsh and lacking in compassion. And it was something I wanted to do um, because I could do it with many of the people that I had worked with and studied with and played and enjoyed. And I could do some things by myself as well, which is something that I still enjoy doing. And this was an activity that I could get involved in where there'd be something tangible. And the scroll is the sort of tangible evidence of that, but the experience itself was amazing. You know,
Why would the Japanese people themselves take the pilgrimage? What was their purpose?
so part of it is a sign of devotion to the ideal that this particular deity had.
Mhm.
Part of it is to participate in culture. There's another pilgrimage, which is maybe a little bit more famous now. It's the 88 temple pilgrimage. This one's 33, but the 88 temple pilgrimage around Shikoku, which was one of the other islands in Japan. And that one is a kind of physical as well as mental challenge. And the pilgrims, what are called, they're called Henro, I believe, um, go in this grand loop around this fairly large island over the course of several weeks, typically. And the tradition and the custom of the people on the island is to help them be successful. So there's it's like the is it Santiago de Compostela in Spain kind of thing where there's a passage of pilgrims on a regular basis. And so this one was a little more convenient for me because it was on the island that I lived on, and I could um, essentially do a kind of hub and spoke pilgrimage as opposed to an end to end pilgrimage. And I wanted to see Japan, a part of Japan that I hadn't seen.
Mhm.
And so there was, um, I'd had an experience um, earlier before I made the decision to do this, where I was sightseeing, visiting a, a town where there was pottery, was famous for its pottery. And my friends and I got a little bit separated, and I was waiting on a train platform, and I was approached by an itinerant monk, somebody who was doing this kind of a pilgrimage. And this was deep into my time in Japan. My Japanese was pretty good. I greeted him. We struck up a conversation, and he asked me to go with him. And
Wow.
I I just was I was intrigued, but I was nowhere near ready to, to do this. And so the I, my response ultimately was thank you, but I'm waiting for my friends. And the pilgrimage that I decided to go on, that you see the evidence of in that scroll, um, it was something I could do with my friends, and I was readier to do it. My comfort level was ready, and there was a sense of urgency because I had set a date to leave the country, and I wanted to do it before I left. And there were all these people that some of whom I had taught, some of whom I had worked with, that I didn't have day-to-day contact with, but this was a way for me to reconnect with them. And on one of the days, there's six or so of the temples in this pilgrimage in Kyoto. And one of the guys I traveled with, who you also know, Chris Ives, was then living and working in Kyoto. And I had called him, and I said, Chris, I need to visit these temples. I'd love to see you. Can we hang out? Can I stay at your place, et cetera, et cetera? And the answers were of course, and when, and we got rolling, and we had a wonderful day. And near the very end of the day that I had the last day I had in Kyoto on that trip, I was in a mad rush to get to the last of the six temples, and I wasn't paying much attention. And I wore my shoes up on a platform in the temple where I guess she was like a nun, was waiting to sign these or write on these scrolls that the pilgrims would bring. And she barked at me. And I was mortified, and I apologized, and I went down the steps, and I took my shoes off, and I came back up, and she was kind of gruff and very firm. And I presented her with the scroll and these little books that I was carrying. And I said please in Japan, in Japanese to, to ask her to do it. And she looked at me and she said, "Why are you doing this?" She asked me the, same question you just did. And I said, "I'm doing this to make a memory and because I've been in Japan and because I love this and I'm interested, but I'm also doing it because my mom and my grandmother are really sick. And these two little books, I don't have them with me, but they're, about this size, that were filled with inscriptions and stamps. One of them was for my mom, one of them was for my grandmother. And that response transformed the experience that I had with that woman, and also kind of help focus, what the hell am I doing here? Why am I doing this? It's like it's because it's a connection to people and to things that matter. And here's this deity who's supposed to embody compassion and mercy and caring, and here I am trying to align with that and do this work. And so um I haven't lived as a Buddhist or, even as a good Catholic or, as a very religious person. But the experience I had in Japan really helped teach me that I was part of a community, and that if I reached out, almost always there were going to be people who reached back. And our reunion at St. Mary in Dedham was the product of a commitment my wife and I had made, to be a part of the community, the parish that we lived in. We had neighbors who were, devoted to the parish, and I think it was the Feast of Saint Blaise. And I saw your name on the bulletin or something, and I'm walking up the line, and I can see you, and I know you didn't see me, and I am just so excited, in that moment. And then you kind of look up from the previous person, and you took care of me, but you also gave me the high sign, go stand over there to to wait so we could catch up again. And that was a moment much like that moment in Japan, where people connect, and that connection makes a difference, and our ability to help each other makes a difference. And so, I haven't always helped people who need help. I haven't been able to sometimes. Sometimes I've been reluctant or shy, there's too much risk. But I find myself incredibly grateful for the life that I've had, for the kind of experience that this little pilgrimage represented. Um, that led me to doing work with this organization called the Toto Institute up in Vermont, which teaches about Japanese psychology. And there are three pillars to that. One is acceptance. Another is the idea that things are not permanent, that there's, things are changing. And the third pillar of the practice that, I began to devote a lot of time and energy to, is gratitude. And there's a kind of daily meditation that I do, that's based on a esoteric Buddhist practice called Mishirabe. This is far simpler. I don't have to go live in a cave and mortify, my flesh and my spirit. I ask myself three questions. What have I given? What have I received? What harm or difficulty have I caused? And I the practice prevents you or demands that you don't ask the so-called fourth question, which is, what has the world done to me? Because that
Uh,
takes the focus, it returns the focus to oneself. And the other three questions are designed to shift the focus away. And so, over the 10, 15 years or so that I've been working with Toto and doing this practice, and I do it informally now. I used to have like a notebook or a journal where, I'd fill pages. Um, but now it's a kind of end of the day, you know, what have I given? What have I received? What harm or difficulty have I caused? And the number of things on the receiving end is huge.
Mm.
And I've done my very best to trim the harm or difficulty I've caused. And I'm motivated partly because of experiences like the ones that I had in Japan, to try to give more back. And
That
that
is that is
that's been
so
transformational
yeah.
for me.
It's so close and so similar to all the things that are going on in my life with recovery, with my faith, and with this podcast I'm trying to do too, because I'm trying to find out what is that, why are we doing this, and what are we doing, and that's universal. I love the connections that you made for us with Japanese spirituality, with the cultural differences and how you were received there. And finally, those three pillars of the Toto study are very similar to our understanding that we have to become aware of who we are in reality, what we're doing good, what we're doing poorly, what we have done well, what we've done poorly, how I have to change, and how grateful I am that there's an agent of change in my life who is willing to help me do that, so that I can,
Yeah,
exactly what you described, start doing more good, start doing less bad, and to just turn towards the help that's offered and to accept it. Damien, this has been a wonderful time. I had no real clue about Eastern spirituality or the practices of it. Um, I'm probably gonna trim it down a little bit because
yeah, I was all over the place.
I understand, but no, no, it was great, and I'd love to have you back to talk about the Toto program at some point.
Yeah,
But this is so wonderful for me to find the universality of all the experiences we've had. That lady, the nun that you described, who was transformed by your compassion for your mother and your grandmother, is a universal symbol. She's a template for the universal compassion, and everybody has one of those people in their life, and they know it when they feel it.
yeah,
I gotta say, you describe yourself as being harsh. That's not been my experience of you, and I don't think it's a fair evaluation of you. You've been very, very helpful to me over the years, and very much a friend, and I really appreciate it. I'm hoping that I don't trim much out of this because it was so fascinating, and I really thank you for the generosity of spirit to come on here. You're getting ready to go back to school and teach in a couple of days, so
yeah.
taking this time out of your preparation for school is very much appreciated on my part, and I'm sure the viewers will feel the same way. So
Jim, thank you for reaching out and asking me. And that's another thing that this whole practice has taught me. There are moments to say yes, and the it, it's and I someone shared this with me over the summer, um, um, and they said to me, when people offer you help, you should say yes because it gives them an opportunity to feel the way you feel when you help them.
exactly,
And
I call it the equation.
yeah,
There
and
got to be
so it's
helpers and helpees, and
yeah,
I focused on that when I lost my leg. I found out that I had to be a helpee as much as I needed to be a helper before.
yeah.
So yes, it's a great feeling to be able to do that, and it's great to have you with us.
Thank you so much. Bless you, Jim.
Thank you. I'm gonna cut the recording here, and we'll probably chat for a second.
Okay.
Well, that was quite an interview with Damian. He has had a breadth of experience that I wish that I had known something about beforehand. Um, I'd like to have Damian back at some point so we could talk about some other things, but right now, well, the thing that struck me about the conversation was just how universal some experiences are, and how our desire is to understand not only other cultures, to understand the people as much like ourselves. The great thing that I have found through my own personal spiritual journey is that God wishes all of his children to be with him forever. Whether you believe in him the way I do or other people do, whether you believe in a higher power, our Creator created out of love, sustains out of love, and finally calls us back to love. The one thing that we can all seek to do is make this a reality in our own lives. And for me, the purpose of this podcast really began when we were doing step 7 and talking about humility, which is described in the book as a firm and clear look at who we are, followed by a sincere desire to become all that we can be, and ultimately to serve God through it. I think we learned a bit about Japan and about the culture and about how all of us serve this Creator and how we all should look to be more like him and like desirous of serving him and all of mankind. So again, I'll see you next week. I got another podcast going next week. At the same time, it'll drop on Thursdays, usually about 6 o'clock in the afternoon. Please send me your comments. I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say about the format. And I also want to let you know that I'm working on the technical aspects of the programs. I know that I'm having problems with voice and editing and stuff like that. I'm trying my best. Bear with me, and you'll hopefully see some improvement each week. Until then, I'll see you next time. Be well.